Good evening, I'm Leanne Sanders. Welcome to APTN National News Weekend. A man convicted of 2 counts of manslaughter in relation to the deaths of 2 Métis hunters in Alberta had a hearing for the appeal of his 10-year sentence in Edmonton this week. Roger Bilodeau was convicted of manslaughter in the shooting deaths of Jacob Sansom and Maurice Cardinal and sentenced in August of 2022. Bilodeau's son Anthony was convicted of 1 count of second-degree murder of Cardinal and 1 count of manslaughter of Sansom. Sansom and his uncle were moose hunting near Glendon, Alberta, 200 kilometers northwest of Edmonton, when they were killed in 2020. In his appeal, the senior Bilodeau says the presiding judge made 3 errors in his instructions to the jury. A decision on the appeal has been reserved, and it may take up to a month to learn if Bilodeau is granted an appeal. Anthony Bilodeau has also appealed his conviction. September 4th was the 1-year anniversary of the James Smith Cree Nation mass stabbing. That day, 10 people from the James Smith Cree Nation were stabbed to death when 32-year-old Miles Sanderson went on a rampage in the central Saskatchewan community. 1 other person was stabbed to death nearby in the town of Weldon. 17 others were wounded but survived the attacks. Miles Sanderson died on September 7, 2022, shortly after he was arrested. He went into medical distress and died while in RCMP custody. A year after the stabbing, a committee created by the Parole Board of Canada and Correctional Service of Canada is investigating circumstances around Sanderson's release from federal custody. They'll share their findings and make recommendations after the investigation is completed. In Manitoba, leaders of major church denominations are standing in solidarity with the families of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. They're calling on the provincial government to search a Winnipeg area landfill for the remains of 3 Indigenous women. Tamara Pimentel has more.
For the supporters of Camp Morgan and Camp Mercedes, this is what reconciliation looks like. Representatives and members of a number of church groups joined the camp outside the Brady landfill to help amplify the voices calling for a search of the Prairie Green landfill near Winnipeg. It's where the remains of Morgan Harris, Mercedes Myron, and Buffalo Woman are believed to be.
It was really important to me that we physically show up, and we brought just a fraction of people who attend our congregations in the Winnipeg area. There are so many more Christian, non-Indigenous households in this area who stand in solidarity with you.
Reverend Dr. Carmen Lansdowne with the United Church of Canada is a member of the Hiltzuck First Nation. She helped bring the group together. Camp Morgan has been here since December 2022, and the new Camp Mercedes is now outside the Canadian Museum for Human Rights. In July, Manitoba's Premier Heather Stephenson said she would not fund the millions needed to perform a search that won't guarantee an outcome. Since then, experts have come forward claiming that the search is feasible, and the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs called for Stephenson to resign. Lansdowne says if the tables were turned, the search would go on.
If this was Premier Stevenson's daughter, there would be no question. If this was the police chief of Winnipeg's daughter, there would be no question. We act like we have never searched a landfill for a body before, that we've never spent $1 million to search for $1 million to search for a missing person before, that we didn't just send the military to aid in searching for billionaires lost in a faulty submarine. This is systemic racism at its best, at its worst.
A national concern Bishop Susan Johnson says stems from systemic racism.
I am before you as a settler Canadian, and I have a message that says this is not just an Indigenous issue. This is an issue for all Canadians. This is a shame upon our nation that the systemic racism that our country is based on continues to this day.
AMC Grand Chief Kathy Merrick says she hopes the gathering sends a message to the rest of Canadians.
Being here today and being able to talk and being able to bring issues forward without asking. And that was one of the good things about what's happening today. We did not ask. You came forward.
Tamara Pimentel, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
International Overdose Awareness Day was recently marked, and Kookums in the Alberta community of Maskwacis held a War on Drugs walk to help raise awareness of the opioid crisis taking too many lives. APTN's Chris Stewart has more.
A steady rain did not stop community members of Maskwacis from participating in the Kookums War on Drugs. The community of 4 First Nations has seen too many overdose deaths from opioids, and a group of Kookums decided that enough was enough. Ethel Curry Reindeer is a co-organizer of Kookums War on Drugs.
We were really bothered by the deaths of the youth, our young people, and in my community alone, Montana First Nation, which we call Agamic, we had 3 young ladies, 3 moms that passed away within 2 weeks. And now this morning I just heard that there's a 4th that's on life support, and it's really disheartening.
She says a walk around the community to raise awareness of the dangers of opioids would be a start.
We felt that having a walk, making a stand, against the drug abuse that we have in Maskwacis, because it's a crisis, and we don't want to lose any more of our youth, our people.
After prayers and sharing of stories of the loss of loved ones, the group made their way walking in the rain around the town site of Samson Cree Nation. The rain seemed fitting for the event as the people slowly walked.
Drugs are taking too many of our parents, leaving too many children orphaned, and it's also a pandemic because kids are getting into drugs younger and younger, and it needs to be addressed. It needs to stop.
Flora Northwest is an elder who says the community has been through too much heartbreak.
We've had suicides, we had homicides, and we've had a lot of losses, and it's been a very painful for the Maskwacis. And sometimes you'd have about 2 or 3 wakes a week because of opioids.
She says it's critical to educate everyone on the dangers of illegal drugs. Even marijuana has been laced with fentanyl and a new horse tranquilizer called xylazine that can kill you quickly and is immune to Narcan, a life-saving drug that can prevent overdose deaths.
What are the chances for our people to be normal again after taking these drugs? I've heard stories about men and women taking 1 joint and they die from that joint. That's how powerful this drug is. That's why, we need to send a message out there to the to the grandmothers, to the mothers, to the community. We need our grandmothers educated. We need our mothers educated. To understand what this drug is all about and what it's doing to our people.
Chris Stewart, APTN National News, Maskwacis.
We have to take a quick break, but we'll take you to Williams Lake, BC when we're back to have a look at what's happening at the site of an infamous residential school. A First Nation in BC has just signed a deal with the provincial government there to purchase land where an infamous residential school once stood. APTN's Tina House has this story.
The St. Joseph's Indian Residential School was first established in 1891 and officially closed in 1981. Over 40 different nations had children that were forced to attend. Throughout the years, St. Joseph's had numerous inquiries launched due to the condition of the school, high number of student deaths, and following the closure of the school, Several former staff members were imprisoned for sexual assault on students. In January of 2022, the Williams Lake First Nation announced that they had conducted Phase 1 of ground-penetrating radar on a small section where the former school once stood. They found 93 reflections that could be human burials, and a further 66 more reflections in Phase 2 of their investigation. In the 1990s, the school itself was demolished, but today, all that remains are outbuildings, a gymnasium, and foundations of the former residential school.
Identifying areas of interest and where we're going to be doing the ground penetrating radar work. It's been an interesting exercise, educating myself and our team on what that place used to look like and what it stood for. And a lot of trauma there, a lot of triggers there, and just making sure that we're leading with ceremony on these things is a big part of how we've been able to get through it.
The Williams Lake First Nation has just purchased the land from the provincial government so they can continue the work that needs to be done to preserve the site.
The Williams Lake First Nation, with funding from the province of British Columbia, is now the owner of the property historically associated with St. Joseph's Mission Indian Residential School. That means, thanks to this purchase, that the property will be returned to the rightful stewardship of Indigenous people and protected in perpetuity.
Chief Sellers says going forward, the community will be involved in the decisions on what to do with the land, but says further ground penetrating radar work will continue.
A big part of the dialogue with our team and with our council and with even the province and the feds about what does happen next and what can we do there, and can we excavate, and can we disturb this footprint without first confirming and identifying if those anomalies and those reflections are in fact unmarked graves.
Tina House, APTN National News, Vancouver.
Deb Haaland is the United States Secretary of the Interior and head of that country's Bureau of Indian Affairs. She's also the first Indigenous person to serve in the U.S. cabinet. She was in Ottawa this week to discuss a number of issues of common interest with her Canadian counterparts, including missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and residential schools. The Interior Secretary also held a brief news conference, and here's a bit of what she had to say.
Prior to the border being between Canada and the United States, it was one continent. We have relatives on both sides of that border. We were all Indigenous people to this continent, and so what one country does, I think the other can learn from.
Local Indigenous media outlets across Canada are feeling the impact of Meta's news block in this country. Since early August, news can no longer be shared on Facebook and Instagram after the federal government passed a law that would force Meta to pay publishers. Here is Maricela Amador with more.
Local media outlets have been left scrambling after Meta, the company behind Facebook and Instagram, started blocking news in Canada. Greg Horn, the editor and publisher of the Mohawk community newspaper Yoriwase in Ganawage, said that he has seen a 13% drop in page views over the last few weeks.
For small publications, that could be very detrimental. Prior to this ban on news, we were reaching 25,000 accounts a week. So, this is so to not know how many accounts we've reached in the last 2 weeks is. It's challenging.
Meta's news block was a response to the Online News Act,
an act respecting online communications platforms that make news content available to persons in Canada,
which became law in June and requires tech companies to compensate media outlets when their news content is shared on their platforms. The federal government said the legislation would level the playing field. But instead, Meta walked away from the negotiation table and has since made good on its threat to block news. Anna McKenzie, a journalist with Indigenews in British Columbia, said they recently started sending out QR codes in their newsletters and encouraging people to print them out and put them up in their communities.
43% of our audience can't access our stories because of the Online News Act and Meta's response on Instagram and Facebook. So it's really scary, like compounding like the silencing of our newsroom in a lot of ways with all of the fires, and we can't get our stories to our audience. And we have lots of folks reaching out like, what's going on? And they don't even know the full impact of what's going on in Canadian news right now.
Eden Finday, the publisher of Indigenews, said that she is worried about the survival of her news outlet and noted the massive reach that Facebook has in Indigenous communities.
My aunties, cousins, neighbors on the res, like all of those folks, people that I'm not related to, but I'm connected to through my community, they're all on Facebook. So for us to have that taken away specifically, I think it really hurts. It really hurts us more as Indigenous people.
Paul Deegan is the president and CEO of News Media Canada, a group that represents over 500 media outlets from coast to coast, and lobbied the federal government in support of the Online News Act.
No piece of legislation is perfect, but in our view, this is good legislation. Google and Meta both have concerns about it, and what we're saying to them is let's work through these concerns together during the regulatory process.
However, the federal government released the draft regulations on September 1st.
Today, we're introducing a new, fair, and reasonable regulation.
And estimated that Meta would need to contribute $62 million and Google $172 million to the Canadian news industry to be exempt from intervention by the CRTC under the Online News Act. Meta remained firm on their stance to continue blocking news in Canada. Michael Roberts, the publisher of Nunatsiaq News in Nunavut, said that they are the last independent newspaper in Northern Canada due to the decline in advertising revenue.
Over the last 5 years in particular, Facebook and Google have used their dominant market position to gradually siphon off advertising dollars across Canada and in the north. When you look at the reduction in advertising dollars flowing through to support local journalism, this just becomes, the straw that will break the camel's back for many publications.
Meta's news block has also financially impacted The Nation, a news magazine serving Quebec's Cree communities.
One advertiser just started 3 months ago for a 6-month period, and that's an $8,800, ad campaign, and we're going to lose money on it. As with any independent Indigenous news magazine or newspaper, there is a limited market for us to be able to access advertising and money. And this just puts another burden on us.
Meta responded to a request for comment by referring APTN to a prior statement regarding its position on the Online News Act. A 30-day public consultation period on the draft regulation is now in effect. Maricela Amador, APTN National News, Montreal.
Another short break now. We'll head to Quebec when we're back, where an Indigenous Youth Addiction Centre has opened its doors. Welcome back. Quebec's only addiction recovery centre for Indigenous teens has welcomed its first in-person group. After 9 months of community consultations, staff training, renovations, and restructuring, Amelia Fournier has more.
So this is our healing room where we have our smudging ceremonies. We could have our healing circles, talking circles.
Walgwyn Centre has been a place of transformation since 1996 for Indigenous youth ages 12 to 17 struggling with addictions. Now it's undergoing its own transformation.
These dream catchers are made by the youth either in a group session or done individually.
Pamela Charlong, the director of the centre, says demand for the centre's services went down since the start of the pandemic, even as mental health and substance abuse rates worsened.
We felt like we weren't hitting the mark with the former program, so hearing from the communities really enriched our vision of empowering youth on their wellness journey.
Walgwyn Centre offered virtual-only services for the past 9 months and found out communities across Quebec and Atlantic Canada wanted more support for youth who had been through the program.
more individual therapy, more land-based training, and more support for families, which Charlong says they've implemented for their next in-person cohort.
The program itself is really culturally rooted, based on strengths to reinforce that hope, meaning, purpose, and belonging that the youth might have lost along their journey.
They'll still be doing activities like cycling, hiking, and making art.
Many of the youth that are coming in have had a negative experience at school, learning, being in that environment. So our goal is when the youth come to provide them a positive experience, a positive learning experience, a safe space, and really take the youth where they are at.
In addition to program changes, staff has been getting more training.
It's a good way to establish trust and letting them know that you really care about them.
They've taken down the old sweat lodge, a much-needed fresh start, says elder in residence Donna Jerome.
They let it out what they need to let it out. And when they leave, they need to be destroyed because of all the pain they have. So I have to give that to my Mother Earth, to take all the pain, what they put in there.
Jerome started off at the center as a firekeeper and has enjoyed taking over for the previous elder, performing ceremonies, guiding sweats, and teaching medicine.
I take over and I love it, and what he taught me, I carry what he taught me. I carry on his own teachings, and that's why I teach clients how to be a firekeeper, you know, how to be calm, how to be humble in here, because this is a secret place.
He was working there when Mona Kaltush, now a cultural mentor at the center, was there as a client when she was 16.
All the males, they're going to build frames, and females, they're going to tie with women.
She traveled all the way from the Innu community of Nutashquan, 1,000 kilometers away.
Je suis rentrée au Walgoin, je me suis sentie respectée, je me suis sentie aimée, reconnue. J'avais beaucoup de sentiments positifs que rarement j'avais ressentis dans ma vie.
Kaltush says she realized she wanted to be a cultural mentor while attending the center and is looking forward to more land-based activities in the new program.
Je me rappelle, on nous a dit que plus tu vas pratiquer ta culture, plus tu vas guérir. Puis c'est vrai. Puis j'ai tout le temps été dans le bois après. Ça me permet de me reconnecter à moi-même, de m'ancrer, d'oublier les tracas de l'extérieur.
One of Kaltush's strengths is that she knows how struggling Indigenous teens feel.
Il y a de l'espoir dans la vie, là. Même si c'est sinueux, des fois, c'est sombre, il ne faut jamais lâcher. C'est ça, moi, que je veux transmettre comme message aux jeunes, qu'il y a de l'espoir. Quand ça te paraît impossible, c'est pas vrai. C'est possible.
Emilia Fournier, APTN National News, Kaskabegia, Quebec.
That's all we have for you this evening. If you'd like to see more of APTN stories, head to our website at aptnnews.ca. Enjoy your weekend.